Go.
Good afternoon, ladies. This is our last lesson from Hebrews Part 2, Lesson 9. Today I want to share with you the lesson that Kay taught this week. I don't know about you, but this week was just hard for me as I studied through the last part of Hebrews chapter 10. I just got stuck on the part about vengeance is mine. How much worse is the punishment going to be when we trample underfoot the Son of God? Those verses just really convicted me, and I just struggled with this lesson. But then when I heard her message this week, it was such a positive message, and I think it's something that we all need to hear and remember. And it's a good thing to remember from this last part of chapter 10. So the title of her message was Habits of Faith That Will Help You Endure. And the first verses that she looked at were Hebrews 10:19 through 22, which says, "Therefore, brothers and sisters, we have confidence to enter the holy place by the blood of Jesus, by the new and living way that he opened to us through the curtain, that is, through his flesh. Since we have a great high priest over the house of God, let us draw near with a true heart and full assurance of faith, with our hearts sprinkled clean from an evil conscience and our bodies washed with pure water." She spent the most time on the very first habit, which is to continually draw near with a true heart and full assurance of faith. Drawing near in these verses is in the present middle subjective verb, which all of that basically means is a continuous action. It starts and it continues over and over. And it's also a choice that we make. We choose to draw near. God is there for us to draw near to, but we choose that. And these verses talked about Jesus Christ and going through the veil. And you remember if you'll pull out your tabernacle diagram from lesson 6, you'll notice as you come into the tabernacle, the first thing that you come to is the bronze altar. And in the new covenant, the bronze altar is represented by the cross. We come in through Jesus' blood, through his sacrifice. And because of his sacrifice, when we get to the most holy place, that veil doesn't stop us like it did the Jewish people. Jesus opened that veil, or God opened that veil, split it in two from top to bottom to represent it was coming from God down to us to open a way so that we can come into his presence. And we don't have to wait till the Day of Atonement once a year. We can come into his presence anytime. That's the reason she reminds us to continue, that the writer of Hebrews reminds us to continually draw near to God. And that last part of that, with in verse 22, she talked about it a little bit, and I thought it was really very good, about our bodies being washed with pure water. What does that mean? Where is that coming from? When you go back and look at Matthew 27, I think it's about around the 50th verse or so, this is when Jesus is in the upper room with his disciples, all 12 of them, and he wraps the towel around him and gets a basin, and he washes each of the disciples' feet. And realize that not only did he wash he washed all 12 of them. He washed Judas' feet, even though he knew that Judas would betray him. Judas had an opportunity. Judas could have kept his faith and kept his eyes on Jesus, but he did not. He turned away and he betrayed him. But Peter, if you remember, in that same story, he tells us that Peter said, "No, Lord, you'll never wash my feet," because that was a servant's job. And Peter realized that Jesus was the Son of God, and he was not going to allow him to wash his feet. And Jesus reminded him, "If you don't let me wash your feet, then you're not part of us." And Peter, he's all excited about everything, and he's so impulsive. But he said, "Well, not only my feet, but my hands and my head and my face and everything, Lord." And Jesus said, "If you've had a bath, then everything is clean. You just need your feet washed. And that is a reminder to us, the pure water of the Word. We have come in to the presence of God. We can come in because of the blood of the cross, which cleansed us from all our sin, which we've talked about in the last few weeks, of how completely and perfectly it cleanses us from sin. But this week as we studied, we looked at those unintentional sins and how the sacrifice. And remember in 1 John 1:9 it says, if we confess our sin, He is faithful and just to forgive us of all sins and cleanse us from all unrighteousness. This is the feet washing, the day-to-day things that we get into. And though we don't mean to, though we try to keep our eyes on Jesus, we still sin, and we're able to come to Him and be cleansed once again. I just love that picture, and I love that illustration. The second point comes from verse 23, which says, let us hold fast to the confession of our hope without wavering, for He who promised is faithful. So the second thing to draw to that will help us endure is to hold fast to the confession of our hope without wavering. Again, it reminds us that because of the cross of Christ, we can come into the presence. Our hope is in Jesus Christ. And because of what He did for us in the cross, we can hold fast and we can do it without wavering. The third point comes from verses 24 and 25. And 25 has always been a favorite of mine. I kind of say that one pretty regularly, especially when I come across with my children. I'm better with other people. But it says, and let us consider how to stir up one another to love and good works. And I kind of skip that part and go to the next part that says, not neglecting to meet together, as is the habit of some, but encouraging one another, and all the more as we see the day drawing near. I like that part about do not neglect to come together, as is the habit of some. Sometimes it's really hard to get out of the habit of going to church and being with other Christians, but we need that habit. And so number 3 is consider how to stimulate one another to love and good deeds. And she had 2 points underneath this. The very first one is not to forsake assembling together. We need each other. We need to encourage each other. We need to be together as we study the Word. And the second part, of course, is to encourage one another or to minister to one another. How many times do we go to church and somebody says, oh, so how have you been this week? And we just put on our happy face and say, oh, we're great, knowing inside that we're dying. And maybe if we were more transparent, we'd say, well, it's kind of been a hard week, and when they tell us that, instead of feeling uncomfortable, we should look them in the eye and say, oh, I love you, my sister. Let me pray for you. Minister, encourage. We need to look for ways to stimulate one another, to stir one another up to love and good deeds, so that we have the strength to go on into the rest of the week and to follow Christ and to hold fast and to do the things that we need to do to endure. The fourth point is probably my favorite, and it comes from verses 32 through 34, which say, but recall the former days when after you were enlightened, you endured a hard struggle with sufferings, sometimes being publicly exposed to reproach and affliction, and sometimes being partners with those so treated. For you had compassion on those in prison, and you joyfully accepted the plundering of your property, since you knew that you yourselves had a better possession, an abiding one. Why do I like this point? This point is to remember. Remember what God has done for us. In Exodus 7, Moses tells the people to set up spiritual markers. We've talked about that in other studies. Think about it, spiritual markers. Let's look back. Let's remember. I agree we should always keep our testimony current, but sometimes it is so encouraging when we're able to look back and be reminded of what God has brought us through. For some of us, it's been some hard things. Some of us are good things. I know that every mission trip I've ever been on, God provided every bit of finances that I needed to go on that trip. When I think about how hard it was to conceive that first child and fertility treatments and all those things, I thank God that He gave me that first child. who is now 36 years old. So it's a long time ago since that happened. I think about the last time Gene was laid off and how God took 20 years ago. He took that layoff and he brought us to a point where we were debt free. Now, who gets debt free from being laid off? I mean, so when I look at what I'm facing again, once again, we're in that same position where God has laid him off. What is he going to do this time? I mean, when I look at what he's done, I have to be excited about what's coming and know that he's going to take me through it. And yes, there were hard things that, no, he didn't take the consequences away. There were times of grief when we've lost loved ones, but he was there to encourage me and lift me up and prepare me for that. So remember what God has done for you, and look back and think about all those wonderful things. And the very last point comes from the last 3 verses in Hebrews chapter 10, verses 35 through 38, that say, "Therefore do not throw away your confidence, which has great reward, for you have need of endurance, so that when you have done the will of God, you may receive what is promised. For yet a little while the coming one will come and not delay, but my righteous one shall live by faith, and if he shrinks back, my soul has no pleasure in him." The very last point is review your contract. Think about it. He says we have need for endurance. Why would we have need for endurance? Because we are going to face persecutions. We are going to have trials. We are going to have suffering. But he has given us everything we need in his word. And I believe it's in either 1st or 2nd Peter, it says, "I have given you everything you need for life and godliness." And that's what the writer of Hebrews is reminding them. No matter what you go through, whatever trials or suffering, he has given us everything we need. And he has told us beforehand that we will face trials, we will face suffering, just as he, Jesus Christ, the Son of God, faced trials and sufferings and persecutions when he was here on this earth. How can we expect anything less as his child? I hope that this lesson encourages you as much as it has encouraged me. I will try to put in the email the outline for this, so that will help you a little bit as you listen. Also, remember, Part 3 starts in a week and a half. We'll start on March 16th, and I hope you picked up your books, and I'll see your smiling face on either Wednesday night or Wednesday morning on March 16th. Thank you, ladies, for your endurance in studying these lessons.